to be one of the more fun and informative webinars we have ever had the honor and pleasure to conduct, because we are going to be talking about a new industry compensation structure that could benefit you whether you're buying or selling a home. And as I said, I'm Greg Hague, CEO of 72 Sold. I have been in the real estate business a very long time. I care not to mention the amount of time because you would add two and two, add the time growing up, add the time in the industry, figure out what my age might be, and we're not going to go there today. I'm also, besides being a real estate broker in 2 states, I'm also an attorney in 2 states. So I have the benefit of having a legal perspective as well. Our other panelist is the amazing Sarah Perkins. Now, Sarah characterizes herself as the statistics nerd guru, something like that, right, Sarah?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. So Sarah is the single smartest person I know in the country on what is going on in the housing market, from what's going on in prices, what's going on in sales, industry news, insight. She knows everybody, has a chance to talk to different industry leaders, different industry thought leaders. In our industry, there is often a difference between leaders and thought leaders. Some are leaders, others are thought leaders. In any case, Sarah, we are thrilled to have you with us today. So what we're going to talk about is there's been some litigation going on in our industry since 2019. Now, actually, the foundation of that industry goes back before 2019. Sarah's going to talk about that for a minute. But there's some litigation, as I said, that's been going on since 2019. It came to, let's say, came to culmination last October with a jury verdict, which we will be talking about, that has since then resulted in some metamorphic changes in the way real estate agents will be paid and the way our business will be conducted. And these do affect consumers in a significant way. So we're going to start by going back, I guess, pre-2019. So Sarah, why don't you talk about this danger report? The danger report. That's kind of an edgy title, the danger report. You know, you talk about what's something we teach is to best represent sellers is what we call curiosity creating ad copy. That when you're putting descriptive copy on a home, when you're putting that online, you don't want to just talk about the home. You want to create curiosity. You want buyers to look at it and feel compelled to pick up the phone and call because you're competing with all these other properties. One of the core things we teach at 72 Sold about how to attract more buyers to our listings. Well, one way to do that, is to have what we call a sticky title, sticky word, sticky. It's like, whoa, I've got to check that out. Sarah, danger report. Those are sticky words. That's a sticky.
It's sticky. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that all about?
So in 2015, NAR actually commissioned Stefan Swanepoel of T360, a very, very well, highly regarded real estate consultant and researcher, to do an analysis, a very, very in-depth analysis as to what are the biggest dangers facing residential real estate, both in brokerage, in the agents, and everything. And this report came out in 2015. It was not entirely what NAR had hoped it would find. And so given the findings that, emerged from it, NAR was like, okay, we're just going to put it right here and not really talk about it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the danger report that came out in 2015, then in 2018, the Department of Justice convened an expert panel to scrutinize the real estate industry, most particularly the commission practices. Sarah, what was the scoop on that?
So the DOJ is responsible for regulating realtor compensation, and that has been that it is not regulated. That has been their, kind of overreaching statement for years and years. And the way that they kind of update every 10 years the document that is the regulation, they have these panels, and they have, industry leaders. They had CEOs of, Zillow and the biggest MLSs in the country. They had, economists, all kinds of people sitting up in these panels, taught for about 3 days, talking exclusively about realtor compensation. And there were some things that emerged from this panel in 2018 that essentially put the Department of Justice on notice of certain activities and, involving steering based on what was, the compensation being offered to agents within the MLS.
Yeah, so the bottom line is that the Department of Justice became concerned. They had been looking at our industry previously, but in 2018, as a result of that 3-day panel, they became particularly concerned about the way commissions were paid in the US and how that in many ways might be unfair to buyers and unfair to sellers. And so then, having nothing to do with the Department of Justice in 2019, 2 lawsuits were filed, the Morrill lawsuit, the Sitzer-Burnett lawsuit. Both of these were class action lawsuits. Now, what that means, a class action lawsuit differs from a normal lawsuit in that there is a named plaintiff. Typical lawsuits have a plaintiff, have a defendant, or have more than one plaintiff, more than one defendant. In a class action lawsuit, you would have a named plaintiff. You could also have a couple of named plaintiffs like Sitzer-Burnett. So you have a named plaintiff, and then you have typically the defendants, whomever they might be, but the named plaintiff is a plaintiff who is representing a class. Now, that class means this could be defined in many ways. In the auto industry, you can have there have been many class action lawsuits relating to defects that caused harm in cars. And so the class would be anybody that bought this car. So I'm a named plaintiff and I represent anybody that bought this car. Here was the danger that they were in, the harm that they might have suffered. In the real estate industry, in these 2 lawsuits, the classes were home sellers. Now, the Sitzer-Burnett was Missouri. The Morrill lawsuit was more broad-based, U.S. Doesn't really matter as much as to say that these were class action lawsuits on behalf of home sellers claiming that the existing fee structure, the way commissions were structured, was unfair to them and anti-competitive and a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So it typically takes quite a while to get a class certified. You can't just file a class action lawsuit and say, whoa, I represent this class, good for me. I'm going to go out there and get all these damages. Courts are very meticulous about allowing class action lawsuits to move forward. And there's a long, arduous, very strict process for getting a class certified and getting what's known as class action status. Well, it took a while, but in both the Morrill and Sitzer-Burnett lawsuits, they did receive class action status, wherein the court felt that it was appropriate, given the circumstances, to let these named plaintiffs represent a very, very, very large class of people like them, which was home sellers. So then, the thing goes on and on and on and on and on, and years go by. Hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars is spent on both sides in discovery, with the defendants trying, and the defendants, by the way, were several large real estate firms. In fact, all of the largest real estate firms in the country, as well as the National Association of Realtors. So those were the defendants, and the National Association of Realtors representing about 500, I believe it is, multiple listing services around the country that are affiliated with the NAR. So time goes by, and then last year in 2023, even though the defendants tried in multiple ways, as defendants always do, to get these lawsuits dismissed, they were unable to do that. The first lawsuit to go to trial was the Sitzer-Burnett lawsuit, and that went to trial in mid-October of last year, just a few months ago. And then I think it was Halloween, wasn't it, Sarah?
It was Halloween.
I think it was a Tuesday, October 31st on Halloween.
Tuesday, October 31st.
Jury verdict came back. The jury verdict came back in something like 90 minutes. So it was a unanimous jury verdict in favor of the plaintiffs, finding that indeed the defendants had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act, that their activities were anti-competitive, and the jury awarded full damages of, is that right there, Sarah? $1.8 billion?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. $1.8 billion, which under antitrust law can be troubled to a whopping $5.4 million. So yeah, that sent shockwaves through our industry, to say the least. And what's interesting is the jury verdict came back, like I said, I think it was in about 90 minutes. But the fun observation was the reason it took 90 minutes is lightning fast, by the way. The reason it took so long is, do you remember why it took so long, Sarah?
They had to figure out lunch.
Yeah, they had to figure out lunch. So we think they probably decided in 15 minutes, against the defendant. So now let's go back again because it's kind of fun. An observation on, remember right here, this T360 danger report for the NAR that came out. So we're going to now fast forward to that. And this is interesting. If you're a resident of this country, you own a home, you're thinking about buying a home, your first home, this is pretty interesting, an observation on the industry. Sarah, tell everyone the background of this, that what NAR spent to get this report, and how probably shocked they were to see what they were hoping they would never see.
So NAR spent upwards of $200,000 on commissioning this. It was a very, very in-depth research that was done. It's, the document is available. You kind of have to do a little bit of digging online to find it, because it's not been made super, super easy to find. But it's upwards, 250 pages long of all the different dangers facing, residential real estate. And the number one at the very top of all of it is the masses of marginal agents destroy the reputation. And the reason NAR was very upset about this is NAR is paid by head count. It's a membership organization, so they don't actually have the whole lot of interest in, if their members sell a lot of houses, they want their members to pay dues, and they like, the more members, the more dues. And unfortunately, that has encouraged this. And so what happened is, the real estate, this is a pretty damning quote. The real estate industry is saddled with a large number of part-time, untrained, unethical, and/or incompetent agents. This knowledge gap threatens the credibility of the industry.
Yeah, and you understand this was designed for our industry to benefit us by understanding what our dangers might be. And really, the bottom line is, what do we need to do to make our industry better? And the number one thing is to figure out how to get rid of untrained, unethical, and incompetent agents. There are just flat out too many agents in the industry. And observation on that, here in the Phoenix market, as an example, we have, I think it's roughly 38,000 agents, and they're competing for roughly 5,000 listings sold a month, something like that. So if you do the math on it, the average agent ends up with one list side sale every 7 months or so. And nationally, I think we're running at a trajectory, Sarah, of what, 4 to 4.5 million sales a year? Is that where we're at right now? Low fours?
Yes, that's where we are right now.
Yeah, so call it 4.5 million sales a year, and there's roughly 1.5 million realtors, which means if you do the math on that, the average real estate realtor, member of NAR, this is supposedly a person who, they're paying dues, they're a member of an MLS. I mean, they have costs. These aren't just real estate licensees. These are the ones who are licensees who are like in the game. I mean, they're competing for business. And on average, they do 3 deals a year, based on 4.5 million sales a year, they're doing 3 list side deals a year. And that is, of course, a major problem. Yeah, that was a wake-up call for the industry. And, a part of the problem, of course, is NAR wanting a large membership count. Got it. They're paid by the person. They get membership dues. They want to be big. And then real estate firms, there's a thing in our industry where real estate firms often are judging each other by how many agents they have, rather than how much consumer business they do. It's a very odd industry in that regard, where, everybody beats their chest that, hey, I went from 88,000 agents to 110,000 agents. And that's at a time when probably the best thing you could do is go from 88,000 agents to 44,000 agents to 22,000 agents, and take those 22,000 agents and make them amazing and actually have them be able to earn a living. But, big real estate firms have a different view of that. And that, in my view, is something I've advocated against for years, that this industry needs fewer better agents who then, because they're fewer and better, they prosper because of it. And that is an industry philosophy that I have been trying to get changed for a very long time. Okay, going back to the litigation. So prior to the judgment, interestingly, prior to this judgment, the judgment came down on October 31st, Halloween. You can see that there in the left side. Jury finds in favor of home seller plaintiff Sitzer Burnett. There it is, $5.36 billion awarded. But what's interesting is even right before the trial, and I'll let Sarah show you a couple of graphs, there were several surveys done through the real estate industry as to were the plaintiffs likely to be successful? I mean, these are days before, the trial's going on. It's big news in the industry. Everybody's kind of holding their breath. What's going to happen? And Sarah, talk about that.
It was, and you know what? A lot of people didn't even know about the lawsuit. And that was what was surprising too. Then some of these, and this is these are informal surveys that were done for primarily people within the industry kind of saying, well, what do you think is going to happen? And here we are, days before the verdict comes down, and it 75 on Friday the 27th of October, 75% of the people surveyed did not expect the plaintiffs to prevail. And then here we are the day before the verdict comes down, and it's saying, are the defendants going to win or are the plaintiffs going to win? And 60% of the industry was still saying, hey, the defendants got this.
Yeah. And yes, how wrong they were. Jennifer Allen has an interesting observation, and that is now, and we'll talk about right after the jury verdict came down, there were immediately other lawsuits filed
within minutes
against other defendants in the industry because it was clear that that the consumer view, the jury view, the consumer view was that indeed this industry needed to change. And so interesting. Now, fast forward to today, just the last few weeks, and it's been very clear in our industry because NAR has now settled. The National Association of Realtors has settled. The other defendants have settled. The industry was all bravado. We're going to appeal. We're going to move on, but that didn't take place. But interesting, Jennifer Allen, go live just for a minute on video. When we were going through this morning to make sure we had everything dialed in, Jennifer, who is one of our founding members here at 72 Sold, works as my right arm. Jennifer, tell everybody what you just observed to Sarah and me this morning.
Yeah, so my husband, who's been in the industry for decades as well, he was renewing his real estate hours and going through the real estate school to do that, and he was telling us that he had no mention in any of his classes and any of his renewal hour classes that mentioned anything about the lawsuit, the repercussions of it, what's happening in the industry, how commissions are changing, none of that. And our son, who has just finished going through the real estate school for his license, literally a week ago, mentioned that there was not a single mention of this in his classes either. So even the new agents coming into the program, as well as the older agents that are renewing hours, nobody's talking about this, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable that the verdict came down last year. It's very clear to this industry what it needs to do. The defendants all settled, and we'll talk about what that means. But unbelievable that even a brand new agent now going through training, getting into the industry, and what do you have to take? Long time ago since I did that. Was it 90 hours? I think you have to take 90 hours of education to get
Yeah, it's 2 weeks of classes. They're 7-hour classes. He did the fast track, so he was doing it kind of in one big run there for just a couple. They do the 2-week program, and and then so to have him finish that a week ago, and have my husband finish his renewal hours as a veteran agent a week ago. It was interesting that neither one of them had any mention from any of the instructors of the real estate school about any of this. They just are not talking about it.
Yeah. An industry in denial, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Industry in denial. So yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So right after the verdict, the NAR and all the defendants said, we're going to appeal, we're going to appeal, we're going to appeal. interesting just from a legal standpoint, since I'm an attorney. There's a misconception often about appeals. And the misconception is that, well, the jury got it wrong, we're going to appeal. You don't appeal a jury verdict. If you're going to appeal, you have to appeal on the basis that there was some error in the law, that the judge, the court made some error in the law. Very tough to win an appeal. You don't go and say, hey, the jury got it wrong. All the jury members unanimously in 90 minutes got it wrong. We want appeals court to reverse it. That goes nowhere. So in any case, a lot of bravado about appeal, and ultimately, as I'll take credit for observing right after this verdict, which, by the way, I predicted the verdict right after the verdict, and everybody says they're going to appeal. Sarah, remember I said to you, ain't never going to happen. They're all going to settle. Yeah. So and they did, and they did, and they should have, and they did, and they should have. So bottom line is, where are we now? So, and I've talked about the industry denial, so whatever, we're past that. And now let's talk about what it's really all about. That's the background. So what does this mean to you if you're buying a home? What does this mean to you if you're selling a home? Well, so what is the settlement all about? Well, the settlement, NAR and the big real estate firms, there's a lot of parts to it, but the parts that would matter most to you as a buyer or a seller is that as of August 17th, there will be no uniform offers of compensation in the NAR affiliated MLSs. Now, what that means in, like consumer talk, is that up till now, when you listed a property for sale on the MLS, when a listing agent listed a property for sale on the MLS, there was a little blank that you filled in how much you were offering of your commission, whatever the seller was paying you, because this was an offer by listing agents to buyer agents. So here's how much I'm offering to a buyer agent who shows and sells my property. So that's known as an offer of compensation to buyer agents. And so as of August 17th, that will go away. It will not be allowed in the MLS. There'll be no field in the MLS for it. Listing agents will not be making offers of compensation to buyer agents in the MLS. And the discussion that listing agents will be having with their sellers is going to relate simply to what they are paid without, let's say, building in what might be paid to a buyer agent. So that's one big change, which means that sellers are going to be, let's say, talking with listing agents and hiring them purely based on whatever it is they charge for their services without having to add on anything to put in the MLS for a buyer agent who might show and sell the home. And that is effective as of August 17th. Also, as of August 17th, now on the buyer side, how does this affect buyers? Real estate agents who represent buyers, members of NAR, part of the settlement, who represent buyers, must have buyer representation agreements with buyers. You can't just show a buyer a home and make money. Well, first of all, there's not going to be offers of compensation, so you're not going to make money that way. So basically, you're going to make money as paid by your buyer. So you have to have a written agreement with the buyer that outlines basically, here's what I do and here's what I expect to be paid. Now, I will point out that there's no prohibition on a buyer who enters into a representation agreement with you, a consumer, a buyer agent who enters into a representation agreement with you. You can, as part of your offer to the seller, on a property, you can include in there a term that says, I've agreed to pay my buyer agent X amount, a certain dollar amount, a certain percentage amount. I've agreed to pay that, and consequently, I want you to pay that. That's okay for a buyer to negotiate into an offer. It's not okay for that to be made as a uniform offer of compensation by listing agents, if that makes sense. Sarah, did I get that across? That makes sense, right? So,
Yes.
So as a buyer, you would negotiate and decide on a buyer agent to represent you. You would enter into an agreement with that buyer agent that would typically be for a certain amount of time and for a certain amount of money. That could be a fixed amount. That could be a percentage of the purchase price of the house you buy. The agreement should define whatever the buyer agent's going to do for you. In some cases, it may be just help you negotiate a great deal. In other cases, it may be actually go out and show you homes. I know me as a buyer, I might want to just look at homes on my own, but then when the time comes to buy one, call up my buyer agent who I had under an agreement and say, all right, I found one. Now I'd like you to take a look at it. You don't have to drag me around to a bunch of homes. Take a look at it. Tell me what you think. Let's talk about what I should offer, and you handle it and help me handle it from here. Variety of things you could do as a buyer. And of course, you would typically pay more if you want more services from your buyer agent. Just kind of depends on what you want. So as of August 17th, representation agreements with buyers will be required of buyer agents. And for anybody that you're working with, there has to be a buyer representation agreement before they show you homes. Now, it's okay for you as a buyer, if you go through an open house that's held by the listing agent, that listing agent doesn't have to have a written agreement with you to show the home. They're not working with you. They represent the seller. So it has to be working with you and showing you the home. So also, if you called a listing agent and said, hey, show me the home, that's okay too. They don't need a representation agreement with you to show you their listing if they're not working with you. If they're just showing you the listing on behalf of their seller, that's okay too. When the representation agreement is required is when that agent is working with you, helping you buy a home rather than just showing you a home they happen to have listed, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Sarah?
Yes, it's, who's going to be compensated for their time, and it's not the listing agent compensated by the buyer. The listing agent has their agreement with the seller, so that buyer is not obligated to have anything signed with them.
Exactly. And as a listing agent, I would show buyers my listings all day long. I would understand they probably have representation, but my job is to get my home sold for my sellers. And buyers call me and want to see the home. That's great. I'm fully recognizing that I may not represent that buyer. Buyer may not want me to represent them, but I'm certainly going to show that home on behalf of my seller and be happy to do it and do my best to make that buyer fall in love with my listing. So buyer representation agreements, again, if you're a buyer, the buyer representation agreement must reflect the compensation amount, whatever you're agreeing to pay your buyer agent, as either a fixed amount or a definitive amount that can be computed. And really the purpose there is that the representation agreement can't just say whatever the seller might agree to pay is what I'm going to get. That is not something that can be computed definitively. If it said 2% of the sale price, that can be computed definitively. So buyer representation agreements have to have a formula for computation of the commission, or it has to be some fixed amount.
And it makes sense too. Listing agents have these agreements with their sellers, and it outlines the compensation. So it just makes sense for the buyers to have that with their buyer's agent as well.
It does. And really, we've lived in a world inside our industry of aggressive competition for listings, where many sellers will interview several agents before they decide on one to sell their home, and agents go in with their value proposition. This is the way I sell homes. This is the way I do photography. This is the way I show them. This is my experience. This is my knowledge of the neighborhood. Here are all the reasons why you should list your home with me instead of the other guys. And, that has been absent on the buyer side. Typically, it's in our industry, there's a rule on the buyer side called procuring cause. Now, procuring cause, what that really is, and I'm getting a bit technical, but it's whomever is entitled, it's like who is entitled to get the commission that's being offered by the listing agent, which, by the way, as of August 17th, that won't be offered anymore. But the rule up till now has been that he or she, this is like an agent, right? He or she who first conducts an inside showing of a property with a buyer that results in a series of events, which without breaking their continuity results in the successful sale and closing of the property. That's the person that's entitled to the commission. And really what that means is if you as a buyer up till August 17th, if you as a buyer go through an open house by a listing agent, but you have a buyer, somebody you want to represent you, that person who you want to represent you may be out in the cold because that listing agent showed you the property, or some other agent that happened to be holding it open that wasn't the listing agent showed you the property. And all of a sudden, they're the ones that will earn the commission, not the person you want to earn the commission. And that has been, in my view, a very unfair result when buyers end up all of a sudden losing the ability for the seller to pay their buyer agent because they innocently went through an open house with an agent who all of a sudden, because they happened to be there, had the right to the commission. That will change. So, so what was wrong with the existing structure? Harmful for sellers. Well, Sarah, that's pretty straightforward, right? Sellers were compensating buyer agents who didn't represent them and were negotiating against them. And by the way, Sarah should have been negotiating against them because they represented the buyers, right?
It blurs the lines a lot. Why would a seller want to pay someone to negotiate against them?
Exactly. So that was one of the real pitfalls and negatives of the structure as it has existed. You know, the idea that this is unfair to a seller. And believe me, the jury was on board with that right away. Very unfair to sellers. Another problem, paying all buyer agents the same regardless of capability. So talk about that, Sarah. That kind of goes back to the danger report that if I'm me, the seller, all right, so I'm paying right under the existing structure, the pre-existing structure, I'm paying, but I'm paying a fixed amount, which is not negotiable regardless of who the buyer agent is and how good they are. Talk about that for a minute, because that's ridiculous.
It is. And so the offer there was an obligation of an offer of compensation to be made prior to any contract, prior to any buyer even walking into the property. And so when, you know, you have a fixed compensation amount that basically makes, and it's at an expected value, at an expected rate with, you know, kind of a certain percentage or something like that, regardless of experience, regardless of anything. And, you know, Greg introduced me at the beginning. I've been in title insurance. I've been, you know, kind of in that arena for 20 years. And I can tell you when I started, I made a whole lot less than I make now because I have 20 years experience. And that's, you know, I earned it. But then you kind of look at it and it doesn't matter if it would a buyer's agent's very first contract or 5,000th contract.
Yeah.
And we know the experience matters.
Yeah, and they earned the same amount as a seasoned pro. Another, and this is a biggie, this is a real biggie, another
this is the biggest one
for sellers. I would say it is. The biggest one is that what's known as steering. So in every market, there has been an expectation, a common expectation by buyer agents that they will receive a certain amount of compensation. And typically, Sarah, that's typically 2.5 or 3% has been very common for a lot of years, right?
Yes.
And that's been true throughout the country. And what happens is buyer agents will look to see, you know, what they're earning if they show a property. And if sellers aren't willing to pay that and don't offer that, haven't been offered that expected amount, then buyer agents, many buyer agents will tend to steer their buyers away. That is, not show their buyers those homes. And
it was,
go ahead, Sarah.
It was so prevalent, and there were the systems enabled the searches to be done where an agent could actually limit and say, I don't want to see anything that offers less than X amount percentage or dollar wise. So properties that could have fit the buyer's, you know, criteria best could have been eliminated simply due to you know, the buyer agent wouldn't have gotten the compensation that they wanted.
Yeah, so that was at one point changed, but the MLSs, many of them at one point actually allowed buyer agents to sort by which properties paid them the most money, and those would be the ones they would then show their buyers, which you know, that meant that sellers had to pay up a certain amount, or bottom line, their homes weren't going to be shown much, right, Sarah?
Exactly. And you know what? It was these lawsuits that precipitated the change. It was once they were filed that the ability to do those searches went away.
Yeah. And then the last thing is, again, looking at the seller side under the pre-existing structure, that the seller really couldn't negotiate. You know, when an offer of compensation was made to buyer agents in the MLS, that became binding on the seller the day an offer was presented to the seller. So bottom line is, sellers had no ability to negotiate that. Again, regardless of the quality of the agent, the quality of the offer, it was just a non-negotiable item. And so, again, that's in our view, these are four problems with the pre-existing structure and ways that the pre-existing structure was harmful to sellers. Now, let's look at the buyer side. So, how was the pre-existing structure perhaps, you know, harmful to buyers? Well, you know, take steering. So let's just reverse it now. number one, unfair to sellers because buyers get steered away if you don't offer up what the market expects. And then the other side of the equation is for buyers. Buyers got steered away from homes where their agent may not have made as much money as their agent wanted. And we know for a fact this is prolific. And we know that just in our organization here in Arizona and then around the country, replete with stories where our listing agents offered less than the expected amount and got angry calls from buyer agents that basically said, if you're not willing to pay up, I'm not about to show your home. And you've got hundreds of examples of that, right, Sarah?
They're just everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, so real unfair to buyers, obviously. And the pre-existing structure didn't encourage negotiation by buyers of a fee because buyers really saw it as being free. Now, it wasn't free, but they saw it as being free because they weren't like out-of-pocket money. So it didn't encourage a buyer to really interview agents and say, look, all right, what are you going to earn and what are you going to do for me? What are you going to earn and what are you going to do for me? It basically was just like pick an agent and then go for it. I already talked about procuring cause, that the pre-existing structure created a system where if you did have an agent that you trusted and wanted to represent you as a buyer, that you had to caution. You had to caution your buyer. If you were an agent, you had to caution your buyer, don't you dare walk through a home without me because I might not earn anything then if I represent you buying it because of this procuring cause rule. And so that was something that happened a lot. A lot of buyer agents who work very hard. Being buyer side is extremely hard. You know, you're constantly looking for homes, helping buyers, going out and showing them properties, negotiating, trying to help them buy deals that they don't end up getting and they lose. And, you know, it is a tough business on the buyer side. And here all of a sudden, your buyer innocently walks through an open house or a new home subdivision and boom, you're out of luck. And yeah, so that was something that was a real negative for buyers. And then to me, one of the other biggies, something most buyers never knew, is you go to a website like Zillow. Zillow was the first to do this in my knowledge. So you go to a website like Zillow, and it's even true today, but that's going to end very shortly. All of these years, you go to a website like Zillow, you see a property that you love. The listing agent is one of our amazing 72 sold agents nationwide. And by the way, I am going to put a little, I'm just going to throw a little thing out here. I have to just like say this. There are 1.5 million realtors in this country. 1.5 million realtors in this country, and fewer than 3,000 of them have been able to achieve a certification with 72 sold. And we are so proud of the 5 hours of training every week that we provide to our agents, educating them on the market, teaching them how to better represent sellers and buyers. And we're very, very proud of that. And one of the things that I looked at as just being so contrary to what we teach and this idea of being Harvard. This is the Harvard of how to sell homes and now going to become also a Harvard of how to represent buyers. But what happened is you'd go to Zillow and you'd click contact agent, you as a buyer, and you would many times think, well, I'm contacting an agent that knows about the home, probably the listing agent, but certainly somebody who knows about the home. And in fact, not at all. The agent who connected with you on Zillow was one who paid to be there and was going to end up, you know, meeting you at a property that they'd never seen either. First time they ever met you, they don't know you. But you connected with somebody on Zillow because they happened to have that big contact agent thing that they paid to have there. And they end up making money by simply showing you the home. You've never met them. And essentially you were bought as a buyer on Zillow. And I started what's known as well, I won't even go there. Stop Zillow movement many years ago because I felt that was so wrong, so harmful to sellers because buyers interested in their homes were not connected with the agent who knew most about the home, and so harmful to buyers who ended up thinking that they were talking to an agent who knew something about a property. That would be logical when they didn't at all. So because of this procuring cause rule, let's just say buyers were agents paid to connect with buyers online. And so let's talk about some change. Okay, Sarah?
Absolutely, we should.
Oh, rules are changing. We talked about that. And a lot of benefits here as we see it. So we're going to bring these up. So better for sellers. Sellers, as we already pointed out, Sarah, sellers will only need to be talking about compensation to their own agent, whatever that amount would be. Typically, that's going to be a lot less than if they had to pack in a buyer agent commission. Buyer agent fees paid by sellers will be negotiable. In other words, a buyer can still include in their offer, whatever their fee is to their buyer agent. So whatever it is they agree to pay, they can still include it, but it becomes a negotiable item, negotiable for the seller, negotiable for the buyer. And so that's going to lead to a lot more flexibility. More restrictions. In number 3, the way the rule is now, the way the settlement came down, there'll be no uniform offers of buyer agent compensation in MLS. So no offers of buyer agent compensation will be allowed in the MLS. There'll also be no offers of buyer agent compensation allowed on any home aggregation website. So any website that aggregates listings from different agents and brokerages, there will, just like the MLS, that would be against the law. That would be a violation of antitrust law for them to allow offers of buyer agent compensation to be published. But under the existing settlement, offers of buyer agent compensation can still be made on an agent's own website, on a brokerage's own website, and also individually, like if I, a buyer agent, call a listing agent, the listing agent can make that offer of compensation. The reason we put more restrictions is because, and Sarah, I'll let you talk about this, the Department of Justice just doesn't like that one single bit. Sarah?
A representative from the DOJ stated last week in very, very, very basic terms, she just said, offers of compensation should not be made anywhere.
Yeah. So if you look at a lot of the blogs and the forums in this industry, there's a lot of chatter about how we're going to work around this rule, how we'll be making offers of buyer agent compensation anyway. Just give me a call. I'm going to pay the same amount to everybody. You're going to love it. It's going to be what you expect. It'll be, there's a lot of talk about how to post it in different places. I have, this is for you buyers and sellers, this webinar, but I have cast a warning to those who follow me and are in my training in this industry that you would be making a grave mistake by doing that. Department of Justice that represents the government has been crystal clear that they believe there should be no offers of buyer agent compensation at all. It's okay if a buyer wants to include their buyer agent, whatever they have to pay the buyer agent in their offer. That's up to them. They can do whatever they want. A seller can agree to pay it or not. That's fine. But the Department of Justice has been crystal clear. And I believe that any real estate agents that make any offers of buyer agent compensation are at risk. And I have advised them not to do that, but that's up to them. And then no steering. Real benefit for sellers is that buyers won't be steered away from your home based on offers of compensation because there won't be any offers of compensation. So there's nothing to steer about. And better for buyers, these new changes, buyers will interview agents and negotiate whatever they think's fair. If they still want to build it into the contract and have the seller pay it, they can do that. So they don't have to pay it out of pocket. Buyer agents will compete based on their value propositions, right, Sarah? Something that, Sarah, listing agents have done forever, but buyer agents have never really done much of, right?
Which is what drove giant headcount because they didn't have to within NAR. And so this is going to require skill.
Yeah, going to require buyer agents having a value proposition. Here's what I'll do for you, and here's what I charge for it. And that's a good thing. Everybody competes based on their value proposition. Amazon does, Apple does. Everybody should. That's what the antitrust laws are all about. You know, compete, get paid based on competition, not based on some preset standard.
I just think of we when we were in Little League and we all got our participation trophies. It's the winners win.
Yeah, we're past Little League, right? Everybody doesn't win. The person with the best value proposition wins. And competition, with more competition comes better services and better pricing. We all know that. And the end of steering, the end of buyers missing out on homes they didn't even know they missed out on because their agents only wanted to show them homes where they made the most money. And that that was perhaps one of the biggest negatives to the pre-existing structure is what's known as steering as to how it affected sellers, steering as to how it affected buyers, and hopefully that will go away. So I'm going to put one little pitch in before we close it out today, and that is 72 sold. 72 sold is widely considered the Harvard of the Harvard of buying and selling real estate. And what I mean by that is our training is the toughest in the country. We believe we're visionaries. We look only at how can our agents do a better job for consumers. Most training in real estate is about how to do more business. You've seen that, haven't you, Sarah? There's hundreds and thousands of trainers, and it's all about what? How to do more business, how to do more
How to do more business, not how to do business better.
better.
And there's a big difference in that.
Yeah, and what we're really proud of at 72 Sold is, Sarah, you've been you don't work for 72 Sold. You're with Navy Title. You're a title rep, independent, but you came to know us many years ago, and I know you're a fan of us. And you have many times said, "I am a fan of this because this is the first training company I've seen in real estate that all they do is train on how to represent buyers and sellers better." Right?
Yes. It's a big deal, and it's a big difference.
Yeah, big difference. So you were invited to this webinar, most likely by a 72 Sold agent. And if you have any additional questions, they certainly are capable of answering those. If for some reason they are not, they have a direct line to us here at corporate, and we can help them. And there it is, 72 Sold agents, very proud of those agents that we have out across the country. And really want to say to you, thank you for attending today's webinar as an invite of one of our 72 Sold agents. And lastly, the amazing Sarah Perkins, 20-year real estate veteran. She's been watching this over the last 9 years. Sarah, every single Friday, tell everybody, we'll finish it up again. So our agents across the country can better represent their sellers, better represent buyers. What have you been doing for them every single Friday for like almost 5 years now, Sarah?
Every Friday, we talk about what's going on in the market. We talk about the economics behind it, what's going on with interest rates. We talk about what's supply and demand in housing and what's happening right this minute.
Yeah,
so everybody is informed.
So in addition to how to represent sellers better, how to represent buyers better, we are blessed to have Sarah at our side to help us educate all of our agents across the country on what's going on in the market, because as a buyer and a seller, that matters to you. And they get this education, all of our agents do, every single Friday. And finish it up at 72 Sold, our first priority has and always will be you, the consumer. All of our agents believe that, they know that, they feel that, it isn't about doing more business as much as it is doing business better. Of course, our agents want to prosper. We all want to prosper, but they understand that the path to prosperity is by being better, representing you better, doing a better job for you, giving you a better home selling and home buying experience. And at 72 Sold, we're proud to be taking the lead in reshaping this industry the way it should be. So Sarah, we finished that 45-minute predicted runtime, and we are at 48 minutes. Not bad there, Sarah.
Crushed it, Greg. We did.
Well, we delivered on time. Let's say it that way. And so, hey, want to say thank you to all of our 72 Sold agents for inviting so many consumers, buyers, and sellers in your market to this webinar today. For all of you out there in the consumer world, these are really exciting times in the real estate industry. There are some who are resisting this change. There are others who are applauding this change. I can tell you that this change is going to make this industry better, make it better serve you as a seller, better serve you as a buyer. And at 72 Sold, we are thrilled to be taking the lead in making that change a home run for you. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for attending. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to the 72 Sold agent who invited you to this webinar.